Sophie grew up with her older sister Laura. To their parents, Laura was the golden child. Smart, pretty, and dependable. But to Sophie, she was the most manipulative person she'd ever known. "You're imagining things," her mom would often say whenever Sophie tried to complain. She still remembered the 5th grade art project they had to finish at home. The night before it was due, Laura accidentally spilled juice all over Sophie's poster. "I was rushing and it just fell off the table," Laura told their parents, all innocent. They believed her instantly. Sophie stayed up until midnight remaking the whole thing while Laura lounged on the couch, watching TV without a care. That was the first time Sophie realized her sister knew exactly how to play the victim. Where are you watching from today? Kindly hit like, comment, and subscribe to this channel for more. When Sophie turned 12, her mom told her she could choose her birthday cake. She asked for chocolate, her favorite since she was little. On the big day, the bakery delivered a strawberry cake instead. "Chocolate is boring," Laura said with a smirk. "I told Mom you'd like this better." Their parents smiled, clapping as everyone sang happy birthday. "Your sister just wanted you to try something new," her dad said warmly. Sophie forced a smile, but inside she hated that her special day had been changed without her consent. It was always like that, Laura making the decisions and their parents excusing it as kindness. Middle school brought no relief. One evening, Sophie proudly came home with a perfect score on her math test. Before she could even show the paper, Laura announced at dinner, "I only did so well because Sophie tutored me." "I didn't," Sophie began, but their mom interrupted with a smile. "That's wonderful, girls. Helping each other is what sisters do." Laura's smug look told Sophie everything. She'd taken the credit without hesitation. Sophie spent the rest of the night staring at her untouched dinner, wondering if anyone in the family would ever truly see her. By the time she was in high school, Sophie had stopped trying to compete for her parents' attention. She kept her head down, focused on school, and worked toward her own goals. The college entrance exam became her dream, her ticket to a top university and maybe her only chance to prove herself. 2 months before the test, Sophie came home from school to find her desk a complete mess. All her carefully organized binders and notebooks were gone. She finally found them, crumpled in the outdoor trash bin. "They looked old and ugly," Laura shrugged. "You don't need to study so much anyway. It's unhealthy." Sophie's voice trembled. "Those notes took me months to make." Her mom waved it off. "Your sister's just helping you relax. You're too uptight." Sophie spent the next few weeks staying up late to recreate all her study notes. Just 1 week before the exam, her alarm clock mysteriously stopped working. It was fully charged, but the battery pack was missing. She found it inside Laura's desk drawer. "I borrowed it," Laura said casually. "Forgot to put it back." So, one bad night of sleep won't kill you. Once again, their parents sided with Laura. "Stop making drama," her dad said. Sophie didn't argue. She just silently added this to the long list of things her sister had done to sabotage her. But she didn't know yet, Laura was far from finished. The morning of the exam arrived and Sophie woke up to the smell of burnt toast. She rushed into the kitchen and froze. Her breakfast, the one she'd prepared the night before, was in the trash. Laura sat at the table eating hers and scrolling through her phone. "Oops," Laura said with a lazy smile. "Thought this was mine. You can grab something on the way." Sophie ignored her, racing to grab her bag, only to find it missing. Inside were her pens, calculator, and ID card. After 20 minutes of frantic searching, she found it shoved behind the washing machine. She barely made it to the test center on time, heart pounding. A week later, Sophie noticed Laura's phone left on the couch. A message popped up from a friend. "Did she mess up? Did your plan work?" Curiosity took over. Sophie opened the chat and read lines that made her stomach churn. Laura had been bragging for weeks about messing with Sophie's things so she'd stop acting smarter than her. She'd even written, "If she screws this up, Mom and Dad will finally stop comparing me to her." When Sophie confronted her, Laura didn't deny it. She smirked. "Even if I did it, maybe you needed to be knocked down a peg." Their dad's only response was, "You did fine on the exam anyway, so what's the big deal?" That was the final straw. "You're dead to me," Sophie told her sister, voice cold and steady. She packed her bags and moved in with her Aunt Grace, who welcomed her without hesitation. 2 months later, the exam results came. Sophie had one of the highest scores in the district and had earned a scholarship to her dream university. The night of her celebration dinner, Laura tried to speak over her. "I helped her toughen up," Laura announced proudly. Sophie put her fork down and said loud enough for the whole table to hear, "You didn't help me, you tried to sabotage me. The only reason I'm here is because I worked twice as hard to overcome your petty games." The room went silent. 1 week before moving into her dorm, Sophie was packing when an email from the university popped up. The subject line read, "Urgent, change to your enrollment status." Her stomach flipped. The message said someone had filed an anonymous complaint, accusing her of having unfair advantages during the entrance exam. Her scholarship was suspended pending investigation. She stared at the words, her hands shaking. She called the admissions office immediately. After 10 tense minutes on hold, the secretary told her Dean Carter would review the case. Sophie had 2 weeks to submit a written response with evidence. She grabbed her laptop and started documenting everything. Sophie drove straight to Aunt Grace's house, where she'd been staying since leaving her parents' home. She burst into the kitchen, phone in hand. "Read this," she said, shoving the screen toward her aunt. Grace's smile faded as she read. "This has Laura written all over it," she muttered, pouring them both tea. That night, Sophie couldn't sleep. She lay awake replaying the smirk on Laura's face at the celebration dinner, the text messages she'd seen, and her sister's cutting words. Maybe you needed to be knocked down a peg. By 3 a.m. Sophie was pacing the guest room, determined to find proof. The next morning, Sophie sat at her laptop creating a detailed timeline of every sabotage attempt Laura had made. Destroyed notes 2 months before the exam, the missing alarm battery, the hidden bag on test day. She typed out dates, times, and exact details. But she knew her word alone wouldn't be enough. She needed undeniable proof. She sent her mom a text asking if they could talk about the situation. The reply came quickly, "Stop being vindictive. You got your scholarship. Let it go." Sophie stared at the message, feeling completely alone. Aunt Grace found her crying at the kitchen table. Sitting down beside her, she said, "If you can't get through to your parents, find a digital trail. Laura isn't as careful as she thinks." Sophie's eyes widened. Her phone. "I saw messages before, admitting what she did." Grace nodded. "Then you just need to get those messages again." Sophie knew Laura would never hand over her phone now, so she'd have to wait for an opportunity. For the next few days, she threw herself into drafting the perfect written statement for the university. 3 days later, Sophie drove past her parents' house to pick up some things she'd left behind. Laura's car was in the driveway, even though she was supposed to be at her college classes. Sophie shook her head, skipping class again. That afternoon, her phone buzzed with a message from Brittany, one of Laura's closest friends. "Your sister is insane. I'm done with her drama." Sophie's heart raced. If Brittany was turning against Laura, maybe she could finally get the proof she needed. They agreed to meet at a coffee shop the next morning. Brittany was already in a corner booth, dark circles under her eyes and her hair pulled into a messy bun. She pushed a coffee toward Sophie and got straight to the point. "Laura made me help her file a complaint against you." She scrolled through her phone and turned it toward Sophie, an email chain between her and Laura. Sophie's eyes scanned the messages. Lies about answer keys. Accusations of paying someone to take part of the exam. All completely false. Brittany hit forward and sent the entire chain to Sophie's email. "I'm not covering for her anymore," Brittany said, her voice trembling. Sophie thanked her, but when she got back to her car, she sat motionless for 20 minutes. This wasn't just sibling rivalry anymore. This was an attempt to destroy her future. The hatred in Laura's words was so sharp it made her shiver. She drove straight back to Aunt Grace's and showed her everything. Grace didn't hesitate. "We're calling the dean. Today." Sophie called the dean's office that afternoon. His assistant booked her in for a meeting 3 days later. The wait felt endless. She spent the time gathering every piece of evidence she could. Brittany's emails, her recreated study notes, and character references from her high school teachers. Aunt Grace helped her practice answering questions calmly, reminding her, "Stick to the facts, not your feelings. Let the truth speak." The night before the meeting, Sophie's mom called her for the first time in weeks. "Laura says you're trying to ruin her reputation," she said sharply. Sophie gripped the phone. "She filed a false complaint against me. I have proof." Her mom cut her off. "Laura would never do that." Then she hung up. Sophie stared at the deadline, feeling the knot of frustration tighten in her chest. She barely slept, her mind replaying all of Laura's sabotage over the years. The next morning, Sophie dressed in her best outfit and arrived at the main administration building early. Dean Carter was younger than she expected, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She laid out each piece of evidence: Brittany's emails, the timeline, the character references. He read everything carefully, his frown deepening. "Filing a false complaint is serious," he said. "If this is proven, there could be legal consequences." After the meeting, Sophie sat by the campus fountain watching students head to orientation events she should have been attending too. 2 days later, an email from Dean Carter popped into her inbox. Her hands shook as she read it. Her scholarship was reinstated while they opened a formal investigation into the complaint. She could move into her dorm as planned. Aunt Grace helped her pack her clothes and books, both of them working quietly but with a sense of relief. The next morning, the doorbell rang at Aunt Grace's. Sophie opened the door to see her mother standing there, arms crossed, face tight with anger. "You're destroying this family," her mom accused, stepping inside. Aunt Grace blocked her path. "No, Laura is destroying herself, and you're enabling her." Her mom's expression crumpled. Tears welled up. "I know Laura has problems, but I don't know how to help her." Sophie stood there, frozen, seeing for the first time that her mother wasn't just an enabler. She was lost too. That night, Sophie lay in bed replaying the image of her mother crying. Maybe her parents weren't just excusing Laura's behavior. They were trapped in it the same way she had been for years. 2 days later, moving day arrived. Sophie loaded the last box into her car. Her phone buzzed with a text from her dad. "Good luck at school. I'm sorry." It was the first time he'd ever admitted anything was wrong. She stared at the message for a long moment before replying thanks. The 2-hour drive to campus felt surreal. Sophie blasted music, trying to drown out the mix of fear and relief in her chest. Her dorm room was small but clean, with 2 beds and a window looking out onto the quad. She unpacked slowly, placing her books in neat stacks. That afternoon, an unexpected email popped up from Professor Helen Morris, who taught ethics. "The dean asked me to review your case. There's something I think you should know about your sister." Curious, Sophie met Professor Morris in her office the next day. The walls were lined with books and potted plants. The professor pulled out a manila folder and slid it across the desk. Inside were Laura's grade reports and disciplinary forms from the previous year. "She was caught submitting a plagiarized final paper," Professor Morris said. "She failed the course and had to retake it." Sophie blinked. "She told everyone it was just a misunderstanding." "She told the disciplinary panel you were the reason she cheated," the professor replied gently. "I think this false complaint against you is her way of projecting her own guilt." Sophie left the office in a daze. So Laura's sabotage had nothing to do with sibling rivalry. It was about covering her own failures. Still, knowing the reason didn't erase the years of harm. A week later, Sophie was studying in the library when her phone buzzed. An unknown number had sent a text. "I thought I'd won, but they weren't done yet." The bitter tone was unmistakably Laura's. Sophie screenshot it and went straight to campus security. At the security office, the officer examined the text and began filling out paperwork. "We'll process a no-contact order," he explained. "It can take a few weeks, but once it's in place, she can't legally reach out to you." Sophie handed over every message, email, and screenshot she'd saved. Her phone buzzed again while she was still there. "Brittany this time. Laura's telling everyone you forged those emails." Sophie texted back, "Save everything. We'll need it." The following days blurred together. Sophie jumped at every phone notification, scanning crowds for faces she didn't recognize. In lectures, she found it hard to focus. Every vibration from her phone made her hands shake. Even walking across campus felt unsafe. She stopped going to the cafeteria alone and started eating in her room. One night, she sat on her bed with her head in her hands, wondering if this was how it would always feel. 2 weeks into the semester, her dad called while she was reviewing notes for economics. "Laura's been suspended from her college," he said quietly. "She's living at home now. Your mom blames you for ruining her life." Sophie didn't answer, she just ended the call. The next morning, she booked a session with the campus counselor. Sitting in the softly lit office, she finally said the words out loud. "My own sister tried to destroy me." The counselor listened and taught her breathing techniques for the panic attacks that had been hitting during class. The counselor also suggested Sophie join a Wednesday evening support group for students dealing with toxic family relationships. Sophie hesitated but decided to try it. That night, she sat in a circle with 6 other students who each carried their own stories of hurt. For the first time since everything began, she didn't feel completely alone. They talked about boundaries, coping strategies, and how to stop taking the blame for someone else's choices. 3 weeks later, an email from Dean Carter popped up in Sophie's inbox. The investigation had found Laura guilty of filing a false complaint. They were considering pressing fraud charges. Sophie stared at the screen, torn. If she pressed charges, it would protect her, but it might also destroy any hope of fixing things with her parents. Not pressing charges meant Laura could try something again. She barely slept that night, turning the decision over in her mind. The next day, Sophie called Aunt Grace for advice. Grace listened without interrupting, then said, "Protecting yourself isn't vindictive, it's necessary. Laura made her choices. If you don't act now, she'll do it again." Sophie felt the truth in her aunt's words. That evening, she sent her response to the dean. She wanted to press charges. The following morning, the district attorney's office called to assign her a victim's advocate named Sarah, who explained the legal process step by step. Sarah, the victim's advocate, explained that the legal process could take months. Sophie would need to give a deposition and might have to testify in court. A month into the semester, Sarah called Sophie back to her office with the restraining order paperwork ready. Sophie signed page after page, her hand aching. The hearing for the order was set for 2 weeks away, meaning she'd have to face Laura in person again. Back in her dorm, Sophie buried herself in textbooks, but every knock on the door made her jump. Her roommate noticed how she froze whenever footsteps passed their door. One evening, Sophie finally told her roommate everything. After that, her roommate made a habit of checking the peephole before opening the door. 3 days before the restraining order hearing, Sophie got an email from her mom, 5 pages long, begging her not to press charges. "Laura has lost her job and is seeing a therapist. You'll destroy her if you go through with this." Sophie read the email twice, then deleted it without replying. She knew where this guilt trip was headed, and she wasn't letting herself be pulled back in. That same week, her psychology professor asked her to stay after class. In her office, the professor shared her own story about a toxic sibling. "Family doesn't give anyone permission to hurt you," she said. The words stayed with Sophie as she began keeping a notebook of memories from childhood. Every entry confirmed the same pattern: Laura ruining every good thing Sophie had achieved. When the day of the restraining order hearing arrived, Sophie walked up the courthouse steps with her aunt. Inside, she spotted Laura with their parents, all sitting on a bench near security. Laura's hair was unwashed and she looked thinner, but when her eyes met Sophie's, the old hatred flared for a moment before she put on a sad face. In the courtroom, Sophie handed over her evidence: emails, texts, and Brittany's statements. Laura's lawyer tried to spin it as normal sibling rivalry, but the judge kept reading with a deepening frown. When Laura took the stand, her story kept changing. First, she denied sending the emails, then claimed they were out of context, then said Brittany had made them up. The judge granted Sophie the restraining order for a full year. Outside in the parking lot, her dad caught up with her. He looked older than she'd ever seen him. "We failed you," he admitted quietly. "We knew Laura was difficult, but we thought you were strong enough to handle it." Sophie shook her head. "No child should have to handle abuse from their own family," she said, then got into her car. 2 weeks later, Sophie began settling into campus life. She decided to try out for the debate team. Her partner for the mock round, Derek, kept cracking jokes between speeches, and for the first time in years, Sophie laughed without looking over her shoulder. They made the team together and went out for pizza with other freshmen. While they were eating, Sophie got a text from Brittany. "Laura's been calling me nonstop, threatening me for testifying." Brittany sent screenshots of the messages. "You ruined my life. I know where you work." Sophie promised to write a statement for Brittany's own restraining order. She put her phone away and returned to the table, smiling faintly at Derek's ridiculous argument that pineapple belonged on pizza. 3 days later, Sophie answered a call from an unfamiliar number. A woman from the district attorney's office told her they were officially charging Laura with filing a false police report and harassment. The trial would likely be in 3 or 4 months, and Sophie would need to testify again. Hanging up, she lay in bed that night thinking about the times she and Laura had been close as children, if they'd ever truly been close at all. Mid-semester came quickly and Aunt Grace drove up for Parents' Weekend. Instead of the campus events, they went to a small Italian place downtown. Over plates of pasta, Grace told Sophie that Laura was still at home, refusing to work and screaming at their mom when asked to apply for jobs. "Your dad sleeps in the guest room now," Grace added. Sophie stirred her pasta slowly. "I'm glad I'm not there anymore." The next week, Sophie received a forwarded letter from her parents' house. It was from a family counselor who said Laura was her patient and suggested Sophie attend a healing session. Sophie didn't even finish reading. She walked to the nearest trash can and dropped it in. Her grades soared, straight A's even in the toughest courses. One of her professors nominated her for a research position usually reserved for juniors. It felt like her life was finally hers, untouched by Laura's chaos. Her Thursday night support group became a routine she looked forward to, celebrating small victories with people who truly understood. 3 months later, Sophie was leaving the library with her study group when she saw her mom standing near the entrance. "Laura's in the hospital," her mom blurted, grabbing Sophie's arm. "She took a bottle of pills last night." Sophie froze, unsure what to feel. Was it real? Another manipulation? She excused herself and walked away, not ready to be pulled back in. The next morning, Sophie called Sarah, her victim's advocate. "Whatever Laura is going through isn't your responsibility," Sarah reminded her. "You can feel bad for her without putting yourself in danger." Sophie decided not to visit the hospital. She remembered too many times when Laura had hurt herself just enough to blame Sophie for it. A week later, her dad texted, "Laura admitted to the doctors that she wanted to hurt you by hurting herself." Sophie screenshot it and sent it to Sarah, who said it would help their case. The trial date stayed on the calendar. When the trial began, Sophie walked into the packed courtroom with Aunt Grace and Sarah. Laura sat at the defense table in a soft pink cardigan, hair braided like she was a teenager again, dabbing at her eyes. But when she looked up, the flash of hatred in her eyes betrayed her. The prosecutor laid out the false complaint, the harassment, the restraining order violation, and years of manipulative behavior. Brittany testified, handing over the printed emails. Sophie took the stand next, speaking calmly, sticking to facts, just like her therapist had taught her. During cross-examination, Laura's lawyer brought up her mental health diagnosis. Sophie answered firmly, "Mental illness doesn't give anyone the right to destroy others." She made choices. The courtroom went silent. The jury returned after 3 hours with a verdict, guilty on all counts. Laura screamed that Sophie had ruined her life as bailiffs forced her to sit down. The sentence: 18 months probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory therapy, 5 years of no contact and repayment of Sophie's legal fees. Outside, their mother approached Sophie with tears in her eyes. "I've failed both of you," she admitted. Sophie said quietly, "I need time and space." A week later, Sophie was back on campus. For the first time in years, her phone was quiet. No threats. No anonymous accusations. Professor Morris called her in to confirm her research position, telling her, "You're going to do amazing things." As Sophie walked across campus toward the library, the winter sun warmed her face. She didn't look over her shoulder, not once. Her life was finally hers. Remember to hit the like button, comment and subscribe to this channel for more of this.